This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's Electric Cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard it read the spin the media and the public politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. We welcome to the show for the first time Jim Morrill, the political reporter for the Charlotte Observer, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, Syndicated columnist and author John Hood, and Becki Gray with the John Locke Foundation. Before we delve into this program, all the NC Spin family wants to extend our condolences to the family of Mark Binker, one of the best journalists in our state. Mark has appeared on our show in the past and always upheld the best traditions of journalists. He's going to be greatly missed. Well, last week was crossover week at the legislature, the week when a bill must pass one house or the other to be considered in this legislative session. We want to talk about the bills that made it and some that didn't. Plus, we'll ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get in. Almost 1,600 bills have been introduced since the 2017 legislative session began in earnest January 25th. With so many pieces of legislation, the session could be extremely lengthy, so lawmakers set up a self-imposed deadline called the crossover deadline, a date that a bill must pass one chamber or the other to be considered in this session. Faced with the deadline, the pace was furious and at times contentious, but only 452 of those 1,600 bills qualified. We won't talk about the bills that we've previously discussed on our show, but we are going to try to hit some of the more notable ones passed just before the deadline. Becki, let's start with you. Before we get into the actual legislation, let's talk about the process. Things in the House chamber got really testy as legislative posturing and maneuvering created tempers to flare. Is the legislative crossover deadline essential, practicable, workable?
Certainly, yes, it is. And, as you mentioned in the introduction, there were a lot of bills that were culled through. A lot of bills have been left to die. That's not a bad thing, certainly. Everyone works better with the deadline. And when you have so many bills that are out there to be considered, just to make things work better, I think that having this crossover deadline where you clean out the closet, if you will. I think Senator Berger made reference to that this week. I think it's a good idea. It helps them get organized, and it also begins to funnel from those things that aren't going to get any attention and those that are, and have the session move along at a better pace.
Let's get into some of the specific bills. Jim, there were several constitutional questions that came before the legislature. One that we want to talk about was North Carolina would call for a federal constitutional convention, something that hasn't been done since before the U.S. Constitution was ratified. What was the purpose behind all of that?
Well, I think that's a thing pushed by conservatives for a long time, that they want to get a convention together to change a lot of things. And I didn't know that this had made crossover this year, because this thing has come up all the time, I think.
Several times.
Yeah.
It is primarily driven, as I understand it, by people who want to create a balanced budget amendment or some other kind of fiscal constraint on the federal government. There are other people who have other goals, but that's the one I hear the most.
States' rights was also one of the reasons for proposing this. Chris, another constitutional amendment would put into our Constitution that we are a right-to-work state. Why do the sponsors feel like that needs to be put into the Constitution?
That's a good question. We've been a right-to-work state for quite a while. I don't think that's going to change. I think this is another effort by the conservatives to say that they're more anti-union than they're normally anti-union. I think this is sort of a political statement. I do want to get one quick comment in. I don't agree that this is a great way to run the government. We might be cleaning out the closet, but we passed bills with really no hearings, with the public not knowing what was happening. Anytime you're rushing legislation through, some of it very important, the idea is we need to have more input and sunshine, not less. So the Democrats have done it too, but I think this is a bad way to run a government.
Yeah. Somebody said that on the floor.
There's a freshman Republican, I think, from Granville County or something, who said he used to think that there was a lot of thought put into passage of bills like this, and now he knows that that's not the case.
What is it they say about making sausage and making laws?
Yeah.
John, another one of the constitutional amendments proposed would fix the personal income tax rate at a maximum of 5.5%. We've talked about that before. What happens when we have another economic slowdown? The government runs short of money. Is this going to be a prohibitive amendment?
Well, I hope so. I mean, that would be the point of it, is to keep the income tax from being raised during a recession, which is vaguely idiotic. Now, there's some good arguments on either side of whether you want to put a cap in the Constitution.
Well, it's currently what, 5.65?
No, the current is 10%,
okay.
so it's really irrelevant because we haven't gotten anywhere close to that. But obviously, the cap would only apply to one form of taxation. If you wanted to raise revenue through other taxes or fees or something, you could. But yes, this is intended to basically lock in the tax reductions that have already occurred.
Becki, an immigration bill would withhold state funds from cities, counties, and college campuses that don't enforce immigration laws, so-called sanctuary cities. North Carolina's already passed legislation prohibiting sanctuary cities in North Carolina. What's the purpose of this bill?
This puts teeth into it. It imposes financial penalties when a city or a college campus does not abide by the immigration law. So yeah, we did have that in place, but there wasn't really repercussions if you didn't do it. So what this does is it imposes financial penalties for those sanctuary cities.
This might be the most poorly drafted legislation in the General Assembly, and that is saying something. It literally allows anonymous complaints to the Attorney General's office to trigger an investigation by the Attorney General. Anybody in North Carolina can complain about any local government, and the Attorney General has to then conduct an investigation. This is really insane, even if you think we need to be tougher on immigration, and I hope the Senate comes to the House comes to their senses.
Another part of this, speaking of college campuses, was the campus free speech bill, Jim. It requires the UNC Board of Governors to establish a policy allowing free speech on state-supported campuses and disciplinary actions for anyone who disrupts the functioning of the institution or interferes with the free expression of others. This got a lot of discussion. What do you think about this one?
Well, I think this was in the context of recent episodes with Ann Coulter in California and the conservative speaker before her, who were basically not allowed to speak at those campuses.
Berkeley, yeah.
At Berkeley, and I think people just wanted to make sure that didn't happen here.
This was precipitated by a case at NC State where a student group had been suppressed. Their right to distribute literature had been suppressed. They argued it was selective because other groups were able to do it. They weren't. They went to court. They won. So the argument here is, instead of having to go to court or having the universities, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill does a pretty good job by national standards of protecting free speech on campus. Most of the other campuses do a poor job or a middling job. The main thing this would do is students, I guess somehow some have gotten the impression they have a First Amendment right to shout down other speakers, which is definitely not correct.
Well, and specifically with UNC Board of Governors meeting, they've had disruptive
but
protests.
that's different. This is, if you have a speaker come to a campus, you have every right to comment afterwards. You don't get to shout them down. That's a heckler's veto. That is a violation of the First Amendment. If the University of North Carolina system won't protect the rights of students and faculty and speakers, the legislature needs to ensure that it happens.
So you say it's a good bill?
It is necessary.
And part of that bill, too, there's a Board of Governors annual report that would be required for each of the campuses that would report on how things are going so that you have that constant oversight.
Chris, the House passed two bills that would require the seats on the state Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, vacant U.S. Senate seats, and district attorney appointments to be filled by someone from the same political party. This looks like a power play.
Well, some of it is. I mean, our governor already has to appoint somebody of the same party, but now they're going to they won't let the governor appoint anybody of that party. The bill would give the governor a list of 3 members. But in terms of the court, this is a radical departure, and I think this is another example of the General Assembly, because we have a Democratic governor, all of a sudden realizing he's going to be able to make appointments and trying to take them away from them.
Comment, Becki, on the bill that would prevent. We had a bill that prevented teachers from having dues for NCAE deducted from their state paychecks, which the court struck down. Now a bill has been passed that says that the Senate passed to eliminate dues deductions from any state employee group. Is this more of the same kind of retribution situation? Senator Ralph Hise was one of the sponsors of this.
Right. It appears to me that it goes back and it fixes the problems that the court had with the previous requirement for the teachers. I think the discussion during that time was that it was targeted to one particular.
Well, what's the
that
problem
this would
with
do
having them
everything? Well,
deducted?
I mean, why should the government collect dues for anybody? I mean, if the unions want to
They
collect their
collect
dues, they
dues
should
for
do it.
independent pension plan.
The court argued that you can't say NCAE is prohibited from collecting dues, but the State Employees Association can do it. That was what the court argued. So whether you think this is a good idea or not, Heiss's proposal is consistent with what the court said. If you're going to do this, you have to get rid of it entirely.
It's also not a coincidence that the State Employees Association attacked Heiss during the campaign. I mean, this is not something that just came out of the blue. It's not an accident that he supported it.
Yeah.
But this isn't a new argument or a new idea, as you mentioned. It has been looked at before, and this is sort of the new and improved version.
Help me if I'm wrong here. It seems like a retaliatory move primarily against Durham County. The Senate passed a bill, Jim, that would prohibit local boards of elections from extending voting hours unless all the state's precincts' voting hours were extended. This looks like it's another court case about to happen.
Well, it probably is. I mean, this stems from the governor's race when Durham votes were late coming in, and people were waiting in line in one Durham precinct, more than one.
Because of some computer malfunctions.
Yeah, and so this would open every precinct to being open late. It seems untenable a little bit.
We're going to take a break and come back and have more of the crossover bills discussion.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
In 2011, our farmers asked for 6,500 seasonal workers. Only 7 Americans showed up to work those jobs. Immigrant farm workers aren't stealing American jobs. To say otherwise ignores the facts. When farmers don't have enough skilled workers, crops go unharvested and farmers lose money. Consumers face fewer choices and higher prices. This is not acceptable. Tell Congress it's time to fix our broken immigration system.
Our state has more than 300,000 with no options for health insurance. 63% are in working families, one illness away from disaster. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
We continue our discussion about bills that did and didn't make the crossover deadline. While we're on the subject of elections, the legislature passed a bill in 2016 that put Republican names on the ballot first, saying that Democrats' names would be put on the ballot first in 2018. Now the House wants to scrap that agreement and make party affiliations appear in random order. John, comment on it.
Well, the Democrats for, a century rigged it so the Democrats were first. The Republicans took over, they rigged it so the Republicans were first, at least while the governor was a Republican. Now they've gone to what I argue is actually the right thing, which is to make it random. Instead of guaranteeing that one party or the other's candidates are always listed first, it actually turns out that the first listed candidate in races get at least a slight advantage. Lots of people who don't really know a lot of these races, they just vote for the first name. So I think it should be random. But they had already
guaranteed the Democrats the 2018 first slot.
Right, because the way they changed, it used to be alphabetical, which just accidentally made the Democrats always first.
Don't they have an appearance problem here?
No, actually making it random is finally the right answer.
Okay, but after the legislation in 2016 that promised the Democrats would be
Sometimes
first.
when you do the right thing, it doesn't matter what the motivation is.
Okay, all right. Chris, the Senate also passed a bill that would move the primary election dates from the first Tuesday in May to the first Tuesday in March in years when there was a presidential election. Does that presuppose we're going to have March presidential primaries from this point forward?
It certainly seems like it. I think the experience last year and a lot of the members of the majority want to be more relevant in presidential primaries. Now they're trying to lock this in. They did it at one time, and I guess they liked it, so we're going to be doing that going forward if this bill passes.
As long as they're in charge.
Right.
Yeah. All right, Becki, the local school districts, education got a lot of play during the crossover. Local school districts are funded by the state and the feds to some extent, but they also receive money from their local counties. The Senate passed a bill that prohibits school boards from suing their county commissioners over funding issues. That has happened in times past. How big a problem is this?
Well, it was very ugly where it happened. I think it's kind of, set up that question again, the separation of powers, the way that state government and local governments are set up, where the county commissioners really hold the purse strings. And so I think it's to avoid those kind of questions. And, if you don't like what the county commissioners are doing, then elect somebody new in the next election.
Well, but in the meantime, you got a school system to run,
Well,
don't
this
you?
was a case in Union County, I think, precipitated this because, the school board in Union County sued the county for not giving them enough money, and it was like a $2 million suit in the cost for lawyers. And so Senator Tucker from Union County was pushing this bill in the Senate.
Chris, one of the bills that one of the issues we've talked about quite a bit on NC Spin has to do with the performance grading of every school in North Carolina. And we've said that the funding, the formula that was set up to determine the grades probably wasn't a good one. The House passed a bill that would change that formula to a 50-50 type of formula, 50% from test scores, 50% from growth and achievement. This looks like a pretty good compromise.
Yeah, it's a good start, but remember the House put that in their budget that they passed last year, and the Senate refused to put that in the final budget. So the House has never been the problem. Representative Horn and others, I think, recognize the flaw in the formula that penalizes schools with a lot of low-income kids. They're trying it now in a separate bill. I hope the Senate agrees.
John, we talked about a couple of weeks ago about Senator Harry Brown's bill that would redistribute the economic development funds, both the JDIG grants as well as the One North Carolina grants that were made for economic incentives for businesses. It passed the Senate, limiting the amounts going to the 20 wealthiest counties and more urban areas. Is the House going to approve this?
I'm not sure. The difficult thing about this issue is that both sides are right in their claim. The rural counties say, look, we're the ones who have higher unemployment rates, we have lower incomes, we're more in desperate need of industrial and other kinds of recruitment, and so the incentive money ought to flow to us and not to these relatively wealthy counties. And then the other side is, yeah, but if the businesses are going to only locate in Mecklenburg or Wake County or some other state, then it doesn't do any good to offer incentives in Onslow. So it's not that both sides have a legitimate point.
Of course.
My view is the basic problem here is the incentives game per se.
Jim, I don't know how much play this gets up in the Charlotte area, but certainly down east, there's been a big feud between sports fishermen and the commercial fishermen. And the Marine Fisheries Commission has been drafting stricter rules for trawlers, particularly for shrimpers. A Senate bill put that rulemaking on hold. Sounds like a victory for commercial fishermen, is it?
I have no idea. That does not get a lot of attention down in Charlotte. So
You mean you don't have a whole lot of trawlers in Charlotte? Anybody want to?
This is a long-standing fight between the commercial folks and the recreational folks about what is a challenging issue, which is to manage a fish stock that no particular person or group owns. This is what they call a tragedy of the commons problem. If everybody has an incentive to fish as much as they want to, and if I chose not to take much fish out and somebody else does, then I'm penalized.
All right, we're going to take a break, come back with more bills, some that didn't pass. Back in a moment.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
I am Kathy Merritt, and I have worked at Cherry Hospital, a state-run psychiatric facility, for 27 years. Like 1 in 3 state employees, I still earn less than $31,000 a year because we haven't had a decent pay raise in years. When I started at 20 years old, that was a wonderful thing to have a state job. That's not the case anymore. And I love the job that I do. I just can't make it on what I do. It's not right. I work very hard. I love what I do, but it's difficult when you're not getting paid for what you do. You can't raise 2 kids on the salary that I had and not work another job and not apply for food stamps and not apply for medical benefits for your children. Tell your legislators to support a pay increase for state employees. Learn more at scenic.org.
The healthcare landscape is filled with questions and uncertainties of changes that are coming. In these times of change, there's one thing you can trust. You can trust your family physician to work for you, not only in treating sickness and disease, but also your overall health. Regardless of how healthcare might change, the men and women of the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians pledge to work upholding your trust. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisors.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
As we said at the onset of the show, there were 1,600 bills introduced so far in the General Assembly. Only 452 passed prior to crossover. Jim Morrill, were there any bills that surprised you that didn't make crossover?
You know, I think one that surprised me was a couple billboard bills that would have given billboard companies more power to cut down trees and to move billboards into areas that aren't now zoned or don't have billboards. But you know what's confusing about this whole thing is that there are some bills that didn't have to make crossover, which I didn't realize, like the mimosa bill that would allow Sunday brunch, Sunday alcohol sales and stuff like that. So, and some districting bills.
Any other surprises, Rick, quickly? There were a number of study commissions that were created. Some bills passed to be sent to study commissions. Most notable was the legislation proposed by the optometrists that would allow them to perform certain surgical procedures now allowed only by ophthalmologists. Becki, is this like assigning a bill to the Rules Committee where it just goes to die a death, or do you think there's a serious study?
I think there's going to be a serious study on this particular issue and some of the others too. The bill that you mentioned, the optometrist versus the ophthalmologist, there just was no compromising on that. And so sometimes I think it's a good idea to study it and also step back and let cooler heads prevail at a later date.
Another study commission bill was the one we talked about a week or two ago concerning breaking up school districts. They sent that to study commission. Was that a good idea?
Well, it's better than passing it. I think that this needs a long, hard look at where this will take North Carolina. But it's interesting that they do this on some of these complicated bills like ophthalmologists and optometrists in schools, and yet they try to remake the courts and election board without even having a public hearing. We need more study, not less.
John, there was an omnibus guns rights bill debated in the House that didn't pass. Speaker Tim Moore said it ain't dead yet. What does that mean about the crossover deadline?
It means the crossover deadline exists, it matters, but it is not an absolute bar to further action.
All right, we can't close out this segment of the show without talking about the temporary restraining order that was issued last week by a 3-judge panel, or week before last, that once again stymied the legislature's ability to limit the appointment powers of the governor. Does this stay mean, once again, this issue is essentially dead? It's going to be a hearing on it, a trial on it, June 23rd?
I think that it is not shocking that there was a restraining order. That does not necessarily mean the ultimate case will turn out the same way.
And there's a hearing scheduled for May 10th, and so I think we'll certainly see more about that. I don't think it's a done deal. The Senate and Tim Moore both have said they believe that they fixed the problems that the court had before.
All right, we're going to take a break, and after these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
Many of the 300,000 uninsured in our state are volunteer firefighters, farmers, fishermen, and small business owners. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
I am Kathy Merritt, and I have worked at Cherry Hospital, a state-run psychiatric facility, for 27 years. Like 1 in 3 state employees, I still earn less than $31,000 a year because we haven't had a decent pay raise in years. When I started at 20 years old, that was a wonderful thing to have a state job. That's not the case anymore. And I love the job that I do. I just can't make it on what I do. It's not right. I work very hard. I love what I do, but it's difficult when you're not getting paid for what you do. You can't raise 2 kids on the salary that I had and not work another job and not apply for food stamps and not apply for medical benefits for your children. Tell your legislators to support a pay increase for state employees. Learn more at scenic.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
Viewers tell us that this is their favorite part of the show, the time when we ask the panelists to tell us something we don't know. John Hood, I'll start with you.
One of the bills that has not yet advanced in the legislature would allow craft brewers to be more able to distribute their own product rather than having to go through wholesalers. That hasn't moved yet. There's a recent poll from Elon University that asked about
it. Didn't make the crossover.
There's some possibility.
Okay.
So the Elon University poll asked people about this, and there was a general sense that it should be that it should be deregulated. Here's the interesting thing: Republicans were far more likely to support deregulating the distribution of beer than Democrats. Democrats only 48% supported. Republicans 62% favored deregulating the distribution of beer. Now, that might surprise people, but that's what they found.
All right, Becki. Tell us something we don't know.
A couple other bills that are still out there. We talked about studies. I work at a think tank. I think studies are great. There's a really important one that would study insurance mandates and the impact that has on health care cost and insurance cost. I think that's really important. A couple other things, occupational licensing, looking at that, and if perhaps there's a way to have a registry of certification rather than these licensing requirements.
Jim Morrill, tell us something we don't know.
Well, you guys probably know this because you all pay attention and you're smart, but I was talking to the General Counsel for the Board of Elections today, and they're still undecided about whether the merger with the Ethics Commission is going to happen. And he said that there are 18 election-related lawsuits still in court right now.
Wow.
Which affects how we're going to vote. And
I did not know that. Thank you. Chris Fitzsimon, tell us something we don't know.
I thought one of the more troubling bills deals with charter schools. It allows, if a company donates significant services or a roof or technology to a charter school, then up to 50% of the slots in that charter school can be reserved for the employees of the company. Then another 15% goes to the board members of the charter school and their families. So you literally are going to have 65%, conceivably, 65% of the slots at a charter school not available to the general public who's paying for every student at that school to go to school. I think it's a terrible way to set policy.
Wow. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.